Hey everyone, back tuning into today's video. We're going to have a look at the Central England temperature today, see how things are shaping up so far for January. But we'll have a look at some past years where we had very mild Januaries and see what the Central England temperature predicted, or possibly not predicted, but see what happened later on in the winter from those very mild Januaries that occurred. Now, before I go, I've actually talk about the advertising for this video as on my pages at GazWebBiz.com. Hit play on the video ad, you'll be supporting GazWebBiz.com. And thanks very much for doing that. So we're going to start off with the Central England temperature for 2014 from Hadley at the UK Met Office. It's been a very, very mild start to January. Temperature, the Central England temperature up to the 10th of January comes in at 7.0. That's very, very warm, an anomaly of 3.4 degrees above average. So I've had a very, very mild start to the year indeed. That's not far off the all-time January CET record. If you have a look at the past years, going back to the year 1659, which is where the Central England temperature begins, we see that the all-time warmest January on record is in fact 1916. It's one of the older records in the CET record. 1916, 7.5 degrees is the all-time January record. So we're just 0.5 of a degree off the all-time record. Of course, that's for the whole of January, whereas this 7.0 for 2014 is just for the first 10 days, and it's provisional. But nevertheless, very, very mild start to January 2014 indeed. And if we was to keep this sort of mildness up for the rest of the winter, we would probably be looking at the mildest winter on record. The all-time mildest winter on record is actually 1868, 1869. We would probably be looking at being able to beat that, to be honest, if we was to keep this sort of mildness up for the next 6 weeks. But we don't always keep it up for the second half of winter. Very often, when you've had a very mild first half of winter, you can get a flip later on winter. In fact, this winter that you're looking at here, 1916, the warmest January on record, did turn much colder as we went through to February. You see that the February Central England temperature comes in at just 3.8 degrees, so a massive drop in temperature from January to February 1916. Also March 1916 was very cold at 3.3 degrees. And there have been other years that have had very mild Februaries, very mild Januaries, and have turned colder as we've gone on into February. Another year where this happened was 1983. 1983 comes out with a Central England temperature of 6.7 degrees, so wasn't as mild as 1916, but it was a very mild month. But February 1983, by contrast, comes out at just 1.7, very, very cold month, February 1983. So that was a big, big drop from January to February in 1983. Now, this doesn't always work out, because some years you get a very mild January and then you go on and have a very mild February as well, and that happened in the period from 1989 through to 1990. We had 3 very mild winters, 1988, 1989 and 1993 in a row. Total write-off winters for cold and snow. The peak of it was probably 1990, where we had 6.5 for January Central England temperature. What happened in February, it was even milder. February 1990 comes out at 7.3. So you don't always get a flip from a very mild January to a colder February, but it can happen, and it has happened in the past. And actually, the last time it did happen was probably 1983, so we're probably overdue, actually, to see a bit of a flip taking place from January to February. Have one of those sort of winters where you get a very mild January and a colder February. We're probably due for one, as the last time it happened was 1983. The last time, by the way, we had a January coming out at 7 degrees or more. You remember the all-time record is 1916 at 7.5, was 2007. That came out bang on 7.0 January 2007, and the February that year came out at 5.8, a very mild, or not a very mild month, but it was a mild February, had a brief cold snap, but January and February 2007 were a combination of mild winter months. So you can get these flips from January to February. 1983 was the last time it happened. This is what happened in 1983. We start off in January with a very strong polar vortex. Deep purple goes around Greenland. That's telling us we've got a very intense polar vortex over Greenland. Strong westerly winds. It was a stormy start to January in 1983. And those westerlies just went on through the months as we go through to the middle of January. Very little change, bringing through those very mild westerly winds across the country. And they persist through to the second half of January 1983. No change, so we go through to 26th here, with high pressure still set up to the south, low pressure still set up to the north. Very mild westerly Atlantic dominated month. Now what happens as we go through to February is that we start off on quite a mild westerly sort of note, but things rapidly start to change, and we start to get more in way of high pressure building in the Atlantic first of all. As we go through to the 6th of February, we're starting to push that low pressure through out into the North Sea. I'm getting this ridge extending from the Atlantic going up to Greenland, pulling winds into the north. And as we go through to the 8th of February, we actually pull winds into the east and the northeast, a proper east and northeasterly blast there, February the 8th, 1983, bringing lots of heavy snow showers to eastern parts of the country. And then it stays cold through the remainder of the first half of the month anyway, with more wintry conditions, hard overnight frost, some snow about in places. We're not talking about exceptionally severe weather through this February, but it was much colder than the January that preceded it. Things did warm up a little bit in the second half of the month. There's still a lot of hard overnight frost. And then this is the all-time record January 1916, the mildest on record. Yep, very strong westerly winds. And we're going to go through these charts, and you'll see that westerly just persists all month, really. That high pressure down to the south, the low pressure up to the north, bringing in those very mild winds off the Atlantic as we move through to the 24th of January 1916. Well, yeah, no change. The low pressure is blasting through there to the north of Scotland. Very mild conditions, and we aimed January 1916 probably on quite a spring-like note actually, with high pressure sitting just to the southeast of the country, bringing up a very mild sort of southerly wind. And there's no great change as we go into February 1916. We bring the low pressure through across the country. It's very unsettled. The first half of February 1916 was pretty mild with westerly winds dominating, but things did change. We saw it on the CET record that it was a much colder February compared to January. And yeah, we get this build of pressure starting to take place in the Atlantic as we go through towards the 20th, 21st. We're pulling winds into the north, so things rapidly start to change. As we go through to the 24th, there we are, we're in an easterly wind. There we've got high pressure just to the north of Scotland, bringing a very cold easterly across England and Wales. And no doubt that will be bringing heavy snow to eastern parts of the country. And we keep that cold weather going to the end of the month. Low pressure sitting to the south, high pressure to the north. A total change, total flip in the pattern compared to what had gone on in January. And we get, by the end of February 1916, 30 centimetres of snow lying across many parts of the country. So it just goes to show you can get big changes from January to February. Now, that's not necessarily say that we will get a big flip around taking place this year, but it can happen. And let's just have a look at the CFS version 2 700 millibar height anomalies for January and February, see what they're showing. This is the height anomaly for January, and we've got low pressure out to the west of the country, we've got high pressure up to the north, so we're not far off from a cold pattern. We have got quite a bit of blocking there up to the north, but it's this trough of low pressure in the Atlantic that's dominating, keeping things very unsettled and keeping things basically westerly in terms of wind direction. As we move through to February, well, it's not really seeing any great changes, to be honest. It's seeing that low pressure for trough persisting in the Atlantic. The high pressure is away to the east and the northeast. It is there, it's not far away, but the CFS model anyway is seeing that the trough in the Atlantic will be the driving factor, keeping winds basically from the west. But as long as we have this ridge up to the east and the northeast, we do have to be on our guard, because at any point the trough in the Atlantic could weaken, just enough to allow that ridge to get in and start to turn the winds into the east and the northeast. As you go on through winter, of course, the temperature differential between the tropics and the pole, which is essentially what creates this strong jet stream and westerly wind, as you go on into the latter part of the winter, that temperature deviation starts to ease off. So the westerlies through February into March tend to weaken quite a lot. So you've always got to be on your guard as you get through to the latter stages of the winter, even in a very mild winter, that as the westerlies ease off, you may start to bring in some form of blocking. Now, this temperature graph is from the website weatherweb.net. This again is from the CFS model. This is taking us through January into February, and you can see that it's for Birmingham, by the way. You can see that well, it's not really seeing much change actually. We keep a sort of zonal sine wave pattern going through the rest of January, so we're up and down in terms of the temperatures. When we go down, we bring in cold fronts. When we go up with the temperatures, we're bringing in warm fronts. But overall, when you average it all out, we come out above average, and the reason that happens is that nighttime temperatures hold up quite nicely. We don't get the frost. So certainly to the 1st of February anyway, it's not seeing any great changes. But as we get through into February, it is seeing quite a drop in temperature then, and it stays quite chilly then for quite a few days through the first week of February, before the temperatures start to pick up a bit for a few days, say around the 10th or the 11th, and then we get another drop as we go through towards the middle of February, and again it stays quite cold then as we go through into the middle of February. 21st of February is just there. So the CFS model on this graph anyway is seeing that we keep zonal conditions, westerly winds for the rest of January, and then we may start to get things turning a little bit colder as we go into February. Now, we're not talking about severely cold weather there. That's at the 0 Celsius temperature just there, and we only just sort of go slightly below it in terms of minimum temperatures in the first week, go more substantially below it through the middle of February, but it's not seeing anything severely cold. It is seeing a cooler February compared to January. Finally, have a look at the charts, just showing that for the next week to 10 days there's no great changes going to be taking place. Low pressure there coming in off the Atlantic on the 19th, a week away, Sunday the 19th, and we keep the winds in from the west as we go through to Wednesday the 22nd. That's the GFS model. The ECMWF, again, westerly winds as we go through to next weekend, Sunday the 19th. Moving through to Wednesday the 22nd, 10 days away. Yep, we keep westerly winds. The strong polar vortex is churning away up there over Greenland and Iceland, keeping the winds in from the west. So it's looking as though January is going to be a bit of a write-off for cold weather and snowy conditions. Early days for that, it's still only the 11th of January, but I'm seeing no real signs of a change to colder, snowier type weather. So that's the first point to put across. Famous last words. I bet the models will do a flip tomorrow and they'll all be showing cold weather, but this morning when I'm doing a video, it does look as though we're going to keep those westerly winds in, certainly for the middle of the month, probably into the latter part of the month as well. Going to be a mild January in all likelihood. As we get through to February, we may see a flip. It has happened in the past. There's no guarantee on it. Some years, as I showed you, that had a very mild January, carried on very mild for February, but sometimes you do get that flip from January, February, and February turns out to be a cold one. So it's just going to have to wait and see what happens, but it's not an ideal pattern to be working with this year. We've had a lot of cold winters over the last few years. We're due a mild winter. I think we're getting that mild winter probably this year. Certainly the first half of winter is going to be very mild anyway. And we're just going to wait and see what happens. It's not a great pattern to work with, but if you want cold and snowy conditions, it's not a total write-off. Things could still pick up for you as we get through to February. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.